I want to talk about first this poison pill on TPP, because this is sort of an amazing story. And later in the week, we will be talking to Becky Bond from Credo to find out what they're doing. And also, I'm going to interview Mark Pocan, who is I think number 3 in the Progressive Caucus in the House, about the TPP and about the Fast Track Authority. And we'll probably play that on Thursday. So Friday night, the Fast Track Authority, the TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, as they call it, passes in the House. In the Senate. But apparently, there was a provision that was put in by Senator Bob Menendez that would ultimately effectively bar Malaysia from the agreement, okay? And it would do so because it has an anti-human trafficking provision. It is it's a provision basically against slavery that basically says a certain amount of your product cannot be made by slave labor. And apparently, when Menendez authored the amendment, it was not going to be, they weren't going to allow for a vote on it. But the Republicans came to an agreement with him and modified the language that essentially would allow Malaysia to stay in the deal as long as it made progress towards reducing its slave labor. So in other words, it said, here's an out. You can't have any slave labor, or you can have only very little slave labor. I'm laughing because this is the most progressive deal. But as long as you show some progress in cutting down the amount of slaves that you use, you're okay. You could stay in the pact. But apparently that modification to the bill, this is so arcane, it's unbelievable, never made it into the bill, but the original one did. So there was either a presumption that the Menendez bill was fixed, or people just didn't have a problem with it, or whatnot. And so here's Sherrod Brown's quote, who has been fighting against the TPP. It's an interesting thing about Menendez speaking about the actual bill. It didn't get fixed. Now, Menendez, I don't know what his status is right now, but people may not be going and saying, wanting to do too many deals with the guy who's not going to be around very often. Who knows? So Brown says, so it means if nothing changes, Malaysia should not be in this agreement. And if the president relaxes or undesignates Malaysia as a Tier 3 designation, it would be a tragedy. So either Congress changes it or the House changes it. So in other words, Malaysia is considered a Tier 3 in terms of labor, right? And apparently if you are Tier 3, you have a problem because of this amendment by Menendez. And Menendez's amendment was never amended to say you could be okay for Tier 3 as long as you're headed in the direction of Tier 2. And Brown says, I'm absolutely happy because no country should get in with that designation. I'll be working with the House. We had some victories here that surprised people. Everybody thought the Senate would be so easy to get through, and they were surprised that it wasn't. I think they got more trouble in the House. And so here's the point. What has to happen now is that either the House has to amend the bill that comes out of the Senate to get rid of the Malaysian provision or the anti-slavery provision and send it back to the Senate where the Senate has to re-vote on it, or they've got to fix it in conference. But in both cases, what the president wanted and what the Republicans wanted was to pass one bill in the Senate and have it pass in the House. End of story, done. This puts up another roadblock. Is it surmountable? Yes. However, people are about to go on recess. They're already backed up now and spending more time on this Patriot Act reauthorization than they wanted to. And I've been saying this for months. If this goes to like July or August or September, all bets are off because suddenly this becomes in the heat of a Republican presidential campaign and, frankly, a re-election campaign for all these Republicans in the House. The Democrats, it's fairly static. Although, if this has to come back to the Senate, now all of a sudden, these senators are going to get grief for not just for voting for this, because this wasn't something I was aware of. They're going to be now making a pro-Malaysian slave labor vote and a pro-cutting Medicare vote. So this is an excellent development. I can't tell from this quote from Sherrod Brown if he had any part of this or what. Like, he's like, well, funny thing. It seems to me, and I got to say, like, when you talk about Senate maneuvering, I suspect it's very helpful to have Harry Reid on your side. And Harry Reid, knowing this is the last 16 months of his career. Did you read what Harry Reid said about lobbying? He said he'd rather be sent to Singapore and be caned than become a lobbyist.
Also a personality thing with him, probably.
I think so.
Yeah. You know, the anti-slavery provision, it's such old-style thinking. You know, it's just not modern and up-to-date. And its unparalleled progressive nature of this bill will reduce slavery by 1/3 in Malaysia. That's the type of practical can-do. You know, I want 2 kids making my shoes, not 4.
I mean, look, I don't think that
Yes.
It's quite possible that someone could come back and say, you know,
lessening slave labor is better than not altering it at all.
And
absolutely. But the thing is as we've pointed out, though, that these deals codify things as they are.
That's right.
So you're not like in the middle of progress to something. You're just laying the rules of the road, which will include Malaysia.
You're creating a baseline. Yeah. And if the idea is to reduce Malaysian slave labor, let's go all in on something like that.
I'm going to go with 100% reduction.
But I do think that there's a legitimate argument made, like this actually works towards some action on Malaysian slave labor, and they have 5 years to get to a Tier 2 designation or something like that. I don't think that's an illegitimate argument.
I know, ironically, there's probably more of legitimate arguments made about that than most other things in this bill.
Yes. However, with that said, from a political standpoint in defeating this bill, which I think is going to be more problematic in a broader sense, happy to exploit that.
Anything that hurts capital. Socialist.